What's going on, gang? Coming at y'all with a little late night video as of this recording, but I'm excited to get to this part of my demonstration as it takes us directly into the meat and potatoes, the main course, the entree, if you will, of why I started this full stack fundamentals web series. As much fun as it is going over boilerplate and setting up a schema in MySQL, this is where it begins to get fun, because this is where we actually begin to connect our code, our server, to the database. We begin inserting and retrieving information. We can begin visualizing it in Postman, and then finally turning it all around into a view, a web page, a single page React application of some kind that asks for that data, retrieves it from the server, that asks the database for it, and everything is up to date, in sync, and good to go. And this is, again, why I made this series. I got asked several questions in DMs about, hey, we're kind of struggling on how to connect the database to the server, to the website, and that workflow. And that workflow is what I want to focus on. And as always, before we can actually get into that, says guy that not but at like 30 seconds ago said, finally, the meat and potatoes. First off, we got to get some house cleaning out of the way. But nevertheless, these are the steps we have to take to get to that main course. So before we're going to install and use the MySQL library, of which there are a few you can play with, so explore out there if you're curious after this course, or this little web series rather, whatever you're finishing according to Covalence, and play around with them, see what's going on out there. We are going to use the default named MySQL npm module. That's redundant. np module, node package manager module, and npm module. So we're going to use the MySQL one. It has typings available for it. It's pretty easy to get up and running with. But first and foremost, we need to actually create a user, not this kind of user, a user for our SQL server to use to make these queries. Right? When y'all made your first connection for the local host, you typically made a root user that had super administrative access to everything. They are like our CTO, our CEO, the top dog in this company. They are the ones that make all these top-level decisions to all of these lovely little projects I have in my left-hand window. They're like the David Wallace of Dunder Mifflin. They have control over all these sub-branches. If Dunder Mifflin is the entirety of the MySQL server, these are all of our Dunder Mifflin branches. I bet they wish they were doing this well. So we're not going to make a branch and put David Wallace in charge of it. We're going to make a branch and put a Michael Scott or a Karen Filippelli in charge of it. We're going to delegate the work to a branch manager that is responsible for handling that branch alone. That way, except for Michael Scott, that way the branch manager screwing up big time will probably only affect that branch and not the entirety of Dunder Mifflin. Again, maybe Michael Scott wasn't the best example for that because he has that kind of power. But nevertheless, let's say someone clever hacks somehow into our SQL server via our root user. Then bam, they have access to information in every one of these schemas. We probably don't want that. We want to make sure to limit off, have some blast doors that close. It says, well, if they hack this to-do user, the only schema that they can screw around in is the to-do schema and not every single freaking one. Hence why we're going to create a user that can only run queries on the To-Dos app and nothing else, if nothing less than for security purposes. So we can actually do that very, very easily by clicking on users and privileges and following the on-screen prompts, but let's go ahead and learn how to write it by hand anyway. I haven't done this in a hot minute, and now that I'm thinking about it, I probably should have looked it up beforehand, but let's see what I can remember. We need to create a new user. We need to give that user a name, and we need to give that user at what host they're going to be running these queries at. And in our case, we're going to be developing on our local host. Do not name this the root user. Hopefully that fails if you try and do that. Don't do that. We already have a root user, and you probably shouldn't make another one. But we'll call this one something like todos_app. I'm just going to name it the same name as my schema just so I can't forget it. But you can call it whatever you like, even pizza, for all that it matters to me. This user is going to be created and be running at our local host, our computer, our SQL server that's running in the background that this workbench is talking to. It needs to be identified by a password, so we're going to say identified with, and this is something that students on 8.0 will need to write. So if you don't know what you're on, you could always, I believe, click on your session here in the bottom left corner. Again, sorry, I can't zoom in on it. There's a little tab that's called Object Info and one called Session, and it will tell you that I am on server or what server you're on. I'm running 8.0 on this machine, and so 8.0 has a different way of making and storing passwords. The NPM module, MySQL, we're going to be using is expecting the old standard and not the new standard. So this is how you create a user on MySQL 8.0 to use the old 5.7 password. And that's what we're going to have to do in this case. If you're on 5.7, I believe you can just write identified by and not have to include this with MySQL native password. So once again, you include the with MySQL native password if you're on 8.0. If you're on 5.7 as your installation, then all you have to do is write identified by. I am 90% certain. I'm sure y'all will light me up in the comments if I'm wrong, or in Discord if I'm wrong. So let me know. By, and this is what your password is going to be. It doesn't necessarily need to be secure if you never intend to take this user anywhere other than your personal machine. Because we're going to be developing on our personal machine and not having this in any shape, way, or form connected to our physical, is website physical? The server spaces. Because we're not going to be taking this machine, our computers, and making it the server that everyone in the world comes to talk to for our website, we probably don't have to worry about an incredibly secure password unless this was like a work machine or something like that. But for these small labs and side projects, just make the password the same thing as the user so you don't forget them. Because I don't want to have to sit here and help you write queries just to remember what password you wrote. So keep it simple. KISS, right? That's that last S if you want to fill me in. So we're going to run this query right here, and we should be able to create a user, successfully green check mark down there. Cool. If y'all know why I'm laughing, drop it in the comments. Just totally gave myself away. I don't remember how to do this. Totally does, because I tried it a minute ago. I just gave it away myself. I'm not very good at keeping a secret. All right, next thing we need to do is run something called grant all privileges on what schema this branch manager is allowed to run queries on. In our case, it's going to be every kind of possible query only on the to-dos app schema. Selects, inserts, updates, deletes, etc. The only thing they can't do is create other super users. So you don't have a branch manager creating other branch managers. Only the super administrator or the David Wallace CTO type on top of the company can make other branch managers. There's no lateral creation going on here with this privileges, so it's actually going to create everything except that ability. So we want to make sure this can run all of our standard CRUD operation style queries, and we're going to have to apply these privileges to the user we have just made. To-dos underscore app at localhost. I got conflicting information if this is actually required or not, but we're going to run this little command here that will just kind of like reset, reset all things about our root users table, like the table of all our MySQL users, just to make sure that everything is like reset, refreshed, up to date, synced up, and good to go. So we're going to go ahead and write that flush privileges and execute it. So remember, create the user at localhost, you make up the name, identified with MySQL native password. If you're on 8.0, 5.7, you don't need this right here, highlighted bit. By this password name, grant all privileges on the schema.asterisk of what you want to have happen, to the name at localhost that you made up here, just copy and paste to make your life easy, flush privileges, run all that, and you should be good to go. Now, how do we test this? We're going to have to finally dig into our code. So here we go. I don't have anything installed, so I can't do that yet. So let's go to our command line here, and we're going to run npm install, or npmi for shorthand, the MySQL node library, and the typings for TypeScript to know what the heck we're trying to do along with it. Awesome. Installed and good to go. Let's go ahead and get a fresh npm run dev running. Make sure I haven't broken anything in between videos, which is a high possibility, as sometimes I kind of playground ideas about what I'm going to do. Nope, we're good. Just realized my commander windows all the way across my widescreen, ultra-wide monitor. Humble brag. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom it in so y'all plebs can see it on y'all's windows there. There we go. Okay. So we should go and connect that into somewhere else, not here in our server. The connection probably shouldn't be here directly. However, I'm going to do it anyway, and we can see why the more we keep writing, the more logical sense it's going to make to actually just, well, take all this information and actually move it to a different file. Again, scalability and organization is something I'm trying to talk about in this full stack fundamental series. So I'm going to come down here like a testing playground, maybe even leave myself a comment in case I have to leave my computer, knowing that this is a testing part of my code, something I want to goof off with for a little minute and get rid of it in case I forget. So we're going to import that library. Now I had a question asked over the weekend about why is it import asterisk as library from library, and that honestly boils down to how the tsconfig server is set up and how the modules and the allow synthetic default imports and stuff like that is set up on your server. There is a nifty article that I typically link. I'll try and remember to leave it in the description of this video if anyone's curious. I did link it in Discord in our bootcamp help channel for those of you that are involved there. If not, sign up for an account and check it out. It's a pretty cool course. And you get to talk to me more regularly instead of YouTube comments, which sometimes I tend to avoid because y'all can be nasty in there. Who am I kidding? We mostly get nice comments. I don't know why I'm being such a negative Nancy tonight. But TypeScript, this is not technically correct, but TypeScript kind of says, okay, I'm importing this namespace and the functions with it and the typings for it, so import all that shiz as this namespace, this name right here. So import all it can do and all its typings kind of together. Not entirely an accurate description, but at least it's a good baseline to have in y'all's heads going, oh, I'm importing a library. That means I do asterisk as more than likely. I'm importing my own code, like our routes. That means I don't need the asterisk as with an asterisk next to that, because there's sometimes you can do that. But for the most part in this web series, we're not going to do that. So that's just a good kind of rule of thumb to follow. Now that I have that imported, we need to establish the connection from this server, this node code, to that database via that user we just created. There are two ways to do so. I know pizza's not a good variable name, just bear with me. There is a couple versions of create something here. We have create connection, create pool, and create pool cluster. We'll be focusing on the first two, and in particular, the second one. The first one, create connection, which I know we cover in our course, and some videos by Matt Landers uses them. Some of y'all have discovered some of my older playlists, which I would advise using this one, not the older ones. Not that the content is bad, but I have a much more concise and better way of describing what I'm doing and why these days compared to a year ago. So, create connection is important to know how to do. You have to manually do what's typically called the handshake. I don't know who handshakes like this. The handshaking process of get my connection, establish it, run the query, get the results, stop the connection. That manual handshake process is important to at least to try to do on one project. Having that low-level control of what happens. Get the connection to the database, run the query, and then stop it. That is important to know how to do. However, in the interest of time and simplicity, I'm not going to cover it here. But if you want a whole video series on that, well, find another one because I don't want to do it because it's a lot of legwork. But nevertheless, maybe I think our course actually has a video or two in there where Matt Landers talks about writing individual queries that do handle that connection. But for the purposes of this video, we're going to focus on this second one called create pool. It creates a pool of connections where you can specify how many can run at one given time before people have to start waiting their turn, right? Think of it like a line, which is what asynchronous code and the event loop work like in Node, by the way. It's a line at something like a Chipotle or a fast casual restaurant, somewhere where if we all go out to lunch, me and all my viewers, I don't have to go to the register, place my order, and stand there the full 10 minutes waiting on my burger, my artisanal burger, for example. I don't have to wait 10 minutes for the burger and hold up the whole line behind me, right? No. What happens? I place the order, I get a flag, a callback, code, puns all day, callback to let me know when to come back and pick up my food. Then the next person can place their order and so on and so forth. That way the line continues to move and we are simply called back to get our food or it's delivered to us. The pool and asynchronous code in Node kind of work the same way. We have 10 available connections by default in a pool, and then those will be running tasks, and when we run out of all 10, then someone has to wait for a table. When one of them finishes, that person can grab that connection and go forth. So this handles that handshake, again, the weird handshake because I can't handshake myself, or I would pick up Percy, but he looks really comfortable. I don't think he's going to want to handshake me either. That handshaking process it does that for us manually by getting the connection, running the query, and then terminating that connection so the next person in line can be taken care of. So that process is automated here. But again, make a note here to explore manually writing create connections where, just so you know how to do them. Okay, create pool expects an object as its argument, something you're going to be seeing a lot. An options, a configuration object. One of the properties is expects is called host. Well, that's our local host. We made the user our machine, the one we're goofing on and developing and learning on. The user, the one we had just made. The password for the user, the one we had just made. And the schema it's going to be talking to, or it calls the property of the database, which irks me to know. To an end, I can't tell you how much it annoys me that it says database and not schema, but c'est la vie, I suppose. La vie. All right, so our schema was the same name to make my life easy. Okay, well, pizza is not a very good variable name. I typically call it connection if it's a create connection, and typically I call it pool if it's a create pool. Doesn't really matter. Okay, so how do we test this? How do we actually write a query? Well, pool has connections available on it. It will get them, and I want them to execute a given query. I want it to describe my users table because I can't select anything because I don't have any data I wrote, so I just have to tell it to describe my table. That's a convenient command that will tell you the table columns and their data types and their default values and their foreign keys. So it's just like, hey, MySQL, what's the users table even look like? It'll tell us what it looks like. Now, this library is not, to my knowledge, promisified. So unfortunately, we're going to get stuck in callback hell. Blech. We either get an error or receive some results upon getting the query done. That is a callback function to be executed when it's our turn. When someone's like, hey, order describe users is up. Oh, yo, dog, that's me. I'm going to console log that. So let's run our if-else statement. If there's an error, log what we probably screwed up syntax-wise. Maybe I wrote describe instead of describe. Maybe I included a comma instead of a semicolon because I'm an idiot. Who knows? It doesn't really matter. The error is going to tell us what we did wrong more than likely. So read y'all's errors and Google them. Console log results. Booyah. There we go. And that's it. That's all there is to it. Let's take a look at our console log here. And sure enough, we have it's an array of objects that have properties that describe each column in my users table. The ID column, email, first name, last name, all the stuff that is in that schema.sql file I included at the end of the last video. Very cool. Okay, that's it. We made a connection. We got that connection and ran a pool with it. We ran our first successful query. We good to go. How cool is that? Well, here's the problem. What happens if I need to run another query based on this query? Two queries in a row, one based on the other? Well, that's where callback hell comes into play. I would have to run another pool.query. Let's say I want to describe I called it to-do, right? To-dos. My to-dos table now, after I successfully asked that one, I'm going to go ahead and copy this callback function because it's going to be the same one. It's just always going to be error first, then results if that happens. I'm going to have to copy and paste this if statement and remove that query line, and you can see where the issue begins to occur because the more and more queries we nest together, the nastier this callback hell is going to get. And successfully, all these console logs I've gone through with my autosave feature kicking on. Oh my god, here we go. Oh my god, he on X Games mode. But there we go. There's my to-dos table right there based on these column names of user ID and content. That's what I'm talking about. All right. Clearly, do you really want to have to write something that looks like this inside of our route? Yeah, these things are going to get kind of complex already. I don't want to have to write something that looks this gnarly inside of something that already is kind of gnarly. So how about we take one of these queries, we're going to wrap it up inside of a promise. We want to promisify it so we can have that nice async await syntax or that promise.then syntax to make our code cleaner and easier to repeat and to manage. There's also a concept in server-side development called layers of architecture, where you have a networking layer, our routes and their endpoints, and our data layer. Sometimes the file system, like in TypeScript Chirper, you had that data store, that chirp store file. Then we have here the data layer, which will be our database. Surprise, surprise, the MySQL database. We kind of want to keep a little crowbar of separation between them. So trying to move this set to its own file and keep from writing queries directly inside of endpoints is our goal. It's like mixing oil and water otherwise. So for the sake of organizing our code and following a good practice to get into now rather than learn from bad mistakes later, let's look at how we can do that. We're going to call it the query function. It's going to be meant to take a query and something we're going to call values. Why would I do this as the number 2? The query and any possible things called escape values. We're going to prepare for those, but not necessarily talk about them maybe until the next video. So that's what the function is going to look like. And what it needs to do is, like I said, take whatever query you provide it. It's always going to take a query. It can't take an empty string query. So we're going to say that's required. And for now, we're just going to provide one of those, just a :any and an optional function argument here in TypeScript, something you can do in TS, but not to JS in my knowledge. We're going to make this function return a new promise. Many of y'all have probably not had to write these, how much write a use effect? All of y'all probably had not had to write one of these since the async section of our course all those many moons ago. But basically, we want to promisify this callback. We're going to wrap it in this promise that gives us that resolve and reject syntax. I have a strange cadence tonight. I'm enunciating everything like the lockpicking lawyer, if y'all know that video. Let me know if y'all think that's kind of true or not. All right, so there's our promise. There's our query. What we're going to do is replace this manually written describe users with whatever query we provide, and that's it. And we're going to run the same if-else statement. And there you go. Now, let's run the same double query that looked pretty nasty with that callback hell structure a minute ago, and instead, promise.then the sucker. Describe my users table, then get the results from that, then that promise when it's done, console log those results, return a new query that says describe to-dos. On the outside, we can chain our next.then, capture those results, log those results just like before, and then finally end it with the .catch in case we possibly screw up some syntax here, which is highly likely. And there you go. So a little bit of extra work now provides us a cleaner looking syntax down the line. And something like this wouldn't be so egregious inside of an endpoint or routing file like that. We still kind of keep our connection stuff away and simply run the queries inside of the files, but we can take one more organizational step after that we're probably going to talk about at the end of this video coming up very shortly. So right there, does that query work? And the answer is thankfully, yes, it does. So, it's like going to an all-you-can-eat buffet and getting a small drink because it's actually a large with a little bit of extra walking. Right? You can always go back to the fountain. You can get a small and pay less and just take a couple extra trips back to the fountain to get a refill, man. That's as good as a large, right? Let's go. This is why I don't want to do coding videos late at night. I'm getting loopy, y'all. I'm getting crazy. I'm getting buck wild. I think it's just actually me and just more of me is coming out because it's late at night and maybe I don't care as much. I do care as much. Who am I kidding? I just like making jokes, and because there's no audience, I'm talking to you, the future audience. Anyway, very cool. But again, writing all this inside of our server TS doesn't really seem like a good idea because it really has nothing to do with our actual server itself. So let's move this sucker away into that prepared DB index file that we had emptied out last time. I'm going to take my test code down here, move that comment since I know it's done now, copy and paste that import statement, copy and paste this connection. Now my other cat's crying outside. I can never make a video without a cat being involved in some way or form. Take this query function, paste it down below, add a nice little keyword here called wix, evidently, export const query, and check it out. If I wanted to now, all I have to do is write import curly braces capital Q query from the database folder. I don't have to write /index, and that's it. How much cleaner is that? If I need to run this from a route, I can do the same thing. But again, we're going to take one further step of organization. Do we have to do this? No. Why am I making you do this? Just to have strong organization and scalable code. The more you keep adding to it, the more you'll thank me you've kept things at least somewhat separated by folders and separate files. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this code right now and move it to our index file so nothing query-wise is happening on our server anymore. And over here, we're going to talk in the next video, don't need this import statement anymore. In the next video, we're going to talk about organizing our queries with some additional features just for a good fundamental phase of our development. This is not necessarily what I would do in the real world all the time, but it's a great starting off point for any future projects y'all intend to code after the course, which is what I recommend you do. Build, get it out there, and learn everything you can by building as much as you humanly can. See y'all in the next video.